Grace and peace be multiplied unto you. I welcome you to today's lesson on clauses and types of sentences. In week 1, we started with clauses, the definition of a clause, and the two main types of clauses. We will quickly go over and then delve into our lesson for today. So, last week we learned that a clause is a group of words that has a subject and a verb and is used as part of a sentence. And then we looked at the type of clauses. We looked at independent or main clause and subordinate clause. So independent or main clause express a complete thought and they make sense on their own. Example, I watched the Super Bowl. And subordinate clauses need help. They are dependent on the main clause, that is, they can't stand alone. Example, after I watched the Super Bowl. So the subordinate clauses always depend on the main clause to make sense. And then an exercise was given to you and I've received and marked them. So types of sentences. Sentences are classified by the number and types of clauses. So in general, sentences are just pieces of clauses put together. It could be one clause or two or more. So a simple sentence is supposed to be having just one clause, and a complex or a compound sentence should be having two or more clauses linked together. So a simple sentence has one independent clause. It has one main clause, that is, it makes sense on its own, like I watched the Super Bowl. And a compound sentence has two independent clauses joined by either a comma or a coordinating conjunction or a semicolon. Example, I watched the Super Bowl and I ate chips. Another example is I watched the Super Bowl, however, I forgot the chips. So that's an example of a compound sentence. You can see that it has two clauses. The example 1 has two clauses. The first one is this, and the second clause is this. Example 2 also has two clauses. First one is this, and the second one is this. So they are all separated by conjunction, and the conjunction is this and this. So this is what makes a sentence a compound sentence. So when you want to make a compound sentence, usually you use coordinating conjunctions. And coordinating conjunctions, examples of them are for and nor, but, or, yet, and so. So putting them together, we form an acronym called the FUNBOYS. And so if you can, for anything at all, if you can remember the coordinating conjunctions used in forming compound sentences, remember the FUNBOYS. And the F stands for, A stands for and, N stands for nor, B but, O or, Y yet, and S so. So join two independent clauses to form a compound sentence using the coordinating conjunctions. So a complex sentence, one independent clause and at least one subordinate clause. So that's the simplest form of a complex sentence, having one independent clause and then one subordinate clause, just like the examples or the questions I gave last week. Those were complex sentences having one independent clause and one subordinate clause, and that was why I asked you to underline the main or the independent clause. So subordinate clauses, we have two types. We have adjectival clauses and adverbial clauses. So we have one that plays the role of an adjective and the one that plays the role of an adverb. The one that plays the role of an adjective, this one can also be called the relative clause. Relative. It can also be called a relative clause. So bear that in mind. So adjective clause or relative clause, they begin with a relative pronoun. So this is why they can also be called a relative clause, because they begin with a relative pronoun. So relative pronouns are who, whom, whose, that, which, and usually modifies the noun directly before it. We look at an example. So adjectival clauses usually begin with relative pronouns like who, whom, whose, that, which. Okay, let's look at an example. So adjectival clauses, they tell which one or what kind. So they tell which one or what kind. So they tell us which one or what kind. An example is the quarterback who threw the interception lost the game. So here the adjectival clause is who threw the interception. Okay, who threw the interception. And what does it do? It tells us more about the quarterback who lost the game. So it gives us more information. That's why it's an adjectival clause. An adjective usually gives us more information about the noun. And so it tells us more information about the noun. And what's the noun? The quarterback. So this adjectival clause is telling us more information about the quarterback. Why? Because it's telling us which one. It's answering the question who, or which one, or what kind. So the quarterback who threw the interception lost the game. So this is the adjectival clause here, right here. That is the adjectival clause. So it modifies the quarterback. It tells us which one. Okay. Adverbial clauses or adverb clause, it begins with subordinate conjunction such as after. It begins with subordinate clause such it begins with subordinating conjunctions such as after, as, because, if, since, when. It describes a verb, an adjective, or an adverb of the independent clause. So its function is similar to an adverb. What does an adverb do? It modifies the verb. So the adverbial clause, what it does is it tells us more about the verb. So it could be in terms of manner, in terms of how. So one word should be ringing in your mind. How? Okay, let's look at an example. Adverbial clause answers the question when. Answers the question when. Answers the question. Answers the question where. In what way. To what extent. And under what conditions. So adverbial clauses answers this question: when, where, in what way, to what extent, under what conditions, and why. It tells when, where, how, why something happened. Example: I turned on the TV before the Super Bowl started. It modifies. Let me take it again. I turned on the TV before the Super Bowl started. So the adverbial clause here, is going to be so before the Super Bowl started, because it's modifying the verb turned. So what time, you can ask a question like, what time did he turn on the TV before the Super Bowl started? Because the verb is turned and it's answering the question like it's asking the question about time. There's an adverb of time, so it's asking the question time. So I turned on the TV before the Super Bowl started. So it answers the question. You can ask a question like, what time did you turn on the TV before the Super Bowl started? Okay, so this adverbial clause, before the Super Bowl started, is modifying or telling us more about the verb turned. So compound complex sentences, two independent, so they usually consist of two independent clauses and at least one subordinate clause. The clauses are connected using correct punctuation. So for example, you can have a very long sentence, and this sentence could have about two independent clause and one subordinate clause. So I've given you some assignments where you'll be able to identify adjectival clauses and adverbial clauses. So try as much as possible to do the work, and then until then, have a nice day. Bye bye.